Once upon a time, a king arranged a marriage between a prince and a fairy. After the wedding, something unexpected happened. When the prince entered his room, he saw that the princess had turned into a black, fat girl. What happened to the princess that caused her to suddenly change into a black, fat girl? To find out, make sure to watch this video until the end. And for more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you. Once, in a certain country, there lived a very wealthy man. Strange and bizarre stories about his wealth were popular among the people. Some said he had found a treasure. Others believed that a beggar had taught him how to turn things into gold. And some were convinced that he had befriended a genie who granted him his wealth. In short, there were as many stories as there were people. But we didn't care where his wealth came from or how he got it. One thing, however, was certain. This rich man was so fat that it was difficult for him to move around. He spent his entire day sitting comfortably in his chair. If needed, 2 servants would help him get up. His only tasks were eating and sleeping. This rich man had only one son, whom he affectionately called Shahzada, Prince. The boy was also famous by this name throughout the town. As the prince grew up, proposals for his marriage started coming from prominent families. His father also sincerely wanted to marry off his only son during his own lifetime. However, the prince dreaded the very idea of marriage. He spent his days hunting and doing nothing else. One day, the prince came to his father dressed in travel attire and said, "Father, last night I had a dream. I was walking through a garden full of various fruit trees. There was one orange tree that bore only 3 oranges. Each branch of this tree was guarded by different birds, not allowing anyone to approach the tree. However, I managed to sneak and pluck one orange. When I peeled it, a beautiful girl emerged from inside. She was as beautiful as a pearl and as radiant as the moon. I asked her name, and she told me her name was Narang Shahzadi, Princess Orange. Now, I want to go and find her, for I shall marry no one but her." The father found these words so amusing that he laughed so hard that the sound of his laughter echoed through the entire house. The prince stood by, waiting for his father's response. But his father's laughter didn't stop. Eventually, the prince quietly left the house, went to the stable, saddled his horse, and set off in search of the Princess Naranja. Meanwhile, after a long while, when the father's laughter subsided, he ordered his servants, "Go and find the prince. I think my child has gone mad." The servants searched high and low from morning to evening, but eventually returned disappointed and empty-handed. The prince, on the other hand, journeyed tirelessly, sometimes spending the night in a forest or resting in a village. After many days of traveling, he reached a country where the winds were very hot during the day, and traveling in the afternoon was difficult. One day, he spotted a house at the edge of a forest. His horse stopped in front of the house on its own. The prince dismounted, and when he reached the door, an old man came out and greeted him. The prince respectfully returned the greeting, and the old man invited him in. The prince asked for permission to rest for a while, as he had been traveling for a long time. The old man kindly allowed him to rest, took him inside, and offered him some simple food. The prince, who was very hungry, ate heartily and thanked the old man for his kindness. The old man asked, "Son, where are you from, and where are you headed?" The prince replied, "I think you might laugh when you hear my story, but here it is. Some time ago, I dreamt that I was in a hot country, and there was a beautiful garden with an orange tree that had 3 oranges. Each branch of the tree was guarded by different animals. Somehow, I managed to pick the oranges, and one of them turned out to be a beautiful princess. Now, I'm searching for that garden." Please pray that God blesses my journey, and that I find success in my mission." The old man said, "God will bless your efforts, but that garden is still very far from here. Follow the edge of the forest until you see a wall. Beyond that wall there is a palace, and inside it lives a witch, and no one is allowed inside the palace. Inside the palace there is the orange tree. You must walk along the wall, and soon you will find an iron gate. Before passing through, you must apply oil to the hinges of the gate. Here, take this bottle of oil and keep it safe. The gate will open on its own, but beware, a ferocious dog will come running out. It is the palace's guard. Throw the bread at the dog to distract it. Once you enter, you will find a woman, a servant, sitting by the stove drenched in sweat. Give her this fan. To the left, there is a well. Half of the rope will be in the water, and half will be outside. You must pull the rope out of the water and place it in the sun. Afterward, head to the orange tree and take this wheat with you. When the animals come to attack you, throw the wheat in front of them. Quickly pluck all 3 oranges and run back to the gate. Do not stop until you reach a river or a stream. Be warned, do not steal any orange before reaching the river. Each orange contains a princess. Choose the one you like the most, but never lose sight of her. The wise one is the one who is cautious before danger strikes. If you follow my advice, God willing, you will overcome all challenges and return successful." The prince thanked the old man and, mounting his horse, continued on his journey. After traveling for several days, he saw a large mansion. As the prince dismounted and approached the door, he noticed it was wide open, but flames were coming out of the interior. He walked along the wall and eventually found another door. This one was made of iron and was locked. The prince applied the oil to the hinges, and the door opened on its own. As soon as the prince stepped inside, a dog, as big as a donkey, lunged at him. The prince, terrified, thought of running away, but then remembered the bread the old man had given him. He quickly threw the bread at the dog. The dog began eating the bread, and the prince entered further into the courtyard. There, sitting on the ground, was a terrifying Abyssinian woman with long, sharp teeth in her mouth, cooking bread. The bread was as large as parts of a millstone, and the woman was sweating profusely. As soon as the prince approached, he gave her the fan the old man had given him. The woman gratefully took it, and the prince proceeded on his way. On his journey, the prince came across a well with half of its rope submerged in the water and the other half out. He pulled the rope out and placed it in the sun. He continued on his way, and after a long stride, he reached the garden, where hundreds of different fruit trees stood. However, there was only one orange tree, and on it were 3 oranges. Every branch of the tree was guarded by different animals. When the prince approached the tree, the animals began to prepare to attack him, but the prince quickly took out the wheat and threw it in front of them. The animals began eating the wheat, and the prince hastily plucked all 3 oranges and put them in his bag. He then turned to run toward the gate. Suddenly a voice shouted, "Rope! Rope! A thief is running away! Catch him!" But the rope responded, "I have been soaking in water for ages and was slowly rotting. This man pulled me out and laid me in the sun. How could I repay his kindness with evil? No, that is not possible." As the prince continued running, he reached the place where the Abyssinian woman was cooking the bread. Again, a voice called out, "Abyssinian woman, the thief is running away. Throw hot ash at him." But the Abyssinian woman responded, "I have sat by the fire for ages, blowing to keep the heat alive. This man gave me a fan, and now I feel the cool air. How could I repay his kindness with evil? No, that is not possible." The prince continued his journey, and reached the place where the ferocious dog was lying on the cool ground. Once again, a voice shouted, "Dog, dog, the thief is running away. Tear him apart." But the dog replied, "I have been feeding on rotten bones for years, but this man gave me bread. How could I repay his kindness with evil? No, that is not possible." Finally, the prince arrived at the gate. A voice called out, "Gate, gate, the thief is running away. Close the door." The gate replied, "I have been plagued by rust for so long, but this man applied oil to my hinges and saved me from it. How could I repay his kindness with evil? No, that is not possible." The prince quickly jumped out of the gate and, riding his horse, began searching for water along the forest. By noon, he still couldn't find any water, and his tongue became dry, almost feeling like a thorn in his mouth. But he didn't lose heart and kept walking. Eventually, overcome by thirst, he dismounted and sat down. At that moment, he remembered the 3 oranges and the advice the old man had given him, but he had completely forgotten about it. He took one of the oranges from his bag, but when he peeled it, a beautiful fairy emerged and sat beside him, saying, "I am so thirsty. If you have any water, please give me some." But the prince had no water. Quickly he peeled the second orange, and from it another fairy emerged, sitting next to him and asking for water. Again, the prince had none. Both fairies flew off into the forest, and at that moment the prince remembered the old man's warning. But it was too late. He spent the night in a semi-conscious state, lying there in despair. When morning came, with dew sparkling on the grass like pearls, he regained some clarity. After a night of rest and coolness, he was ready to travel again. His faithful horse stood nearby, its head lowered. The prince mounted his horse and continued his journey. After a while, he reached the banks of a river, its water shining like a mirror. Small fish swam about, playing in the water. The prince dismounted, drank water from a bowl, and thanked God. He then gave water to his horse and sat under the shade of a tree, taking out the third orange. When he peeled it, another beautiful fairy appeared. Seeing the fairy, the prince felt a pang of regret, thinking that all his efforts had been in vain, as he had hoped that the princess would emerge from this one. The fairy, seeing the prince, asked for water, and he offered her some from his bowl. The fairy drank it, and in a flash she turned into a beautiful girl. Her hair gleamed like gold, her eyes were like lotus flowers, and her body was as beautiful as pearls. This was the princess he had seen in his dream. The prince gazed at her in astonishment, while the princess looked around, amazed by everything, because this country was completely new to her, and everything was unfamiliar. The prince asked, "Princess, what is your name?" The princess replied, "My name is Narang shahzadi. When I was 5 years old, a fairy imprisoned me in an orange. Now, after 12 years, I have seen the world again." The prince asked, "Why did the fairy imprison you?" The princess said, "The fairy wanted me from my mother, but my mother couldn't give me to her. From that day, the fairy became an enemy to me and my mother. One day, while I was playing in the garden, that evil fairy came and turned me into an animal, locking me in an orange and using magic to make me fall asleep." The prince asked, "What do you plan to do now?" The princess replied, "What else is there to plan? I will go wherever you take me. I will be your servant and stay with you." The prince smiled and said, "Will you marry me?" The princess smiled and nodded, then lowered her head in agreement. The prince, happy, helped her onto his horse, and they began their journey home. After a few days of traveling, the prince and the princess arrived near the prince's homeland. A grove of trees stood at a short distance from the city, with a pond nearby. The prince stopped his horse and said to Narang shahzadi, "We have reached my city, but it would not be right for you to go there like this. Wait here for me, and I will make arrangements for your reception." The princess replied, "I am afraid to be alone. Please return quickly, and don't let me fall into any trouble." The prince reassured her, saying, "This is my own country, and no one would dare harm you here." He then left on his horse toward the city, and the princess sat under the shade of a tree, waiting for him. While she was waiting, the princess heard some movement in the bushes. Thinking it might be a wolf, she quickly climbed a tree and hid among the leaves. But instead of a wolf, a very ugly girl appeared, carrying a water jug. When the girl saw her reflection in the water, she was shocked and said, "I don't understand why people call me ugly. I am more beautiful than the moon. Everyone in the world is a fool." The princess couldn't help but laugh at this. The ugly girl looked up and saw the princess hiding in the tree. She laughed and said, "Why are you sitting up there? Come down, let's talk. Some of you will speak your part, and some of me will tell mine," said the princess as she descended from the tree. The girl asked, "What is your name?" The princess replied, "My name is Narang, princess." The girl asked, "How did you come here?" The princess said, "I came with the prince. He has gone to the city to arrange for my welcome. He will marry me." The girl replied, "My dear Narang, your hair is in a mess. Come here and let me comb it." As the princess sat down to have her hair done, the wicked girl took a needle from her hair and pierced it into the princess's head. She said, "Turn into a badshah, Narang princess." At that moment, the princess transformed from a human into a beast and flew up to the tree. The girl then broke the jar and threw it aside, sitting down to wait for the prince. After a while, the prince arrived, wearing beautiful clothes and precious jewelry, accompanied by many slaves and servants. But instead of finding the beautiful princess, they saw a black, ugly, and fat girl. They all looked at each other in astonishment. The prince was equally shocked and asked, "Who are you? Where is the princess who was sitting here?" The girl replied, "It's so sad that you've already forgotten me before even marrying me. I am the same Narang princess you left here." The prince said, "You are Narang princess? But Narang princess was very beautiful." The girl responded, "Yes, I am the same Narang princess. When you left me here, a sorceress came and asked what I was doing. I told her I had come with the prince, and he had gone to the city to make arrangements for my welcome." Hearing this, the sorceress took some water from a pond, chanted something, and threw it over me. She cursed me to become ugly. Now, this is what I have become. The prince was convinced, and he ordered his servants to take her to the palace as a bride. When the girl put on the dress and jewels, she looked even more hideous. She sat in the palanquin, and the bearers took her to the city. People gathered in the streets and on rooftops to see the Narang princess, but when they saw the ugly woman, they turned away in disgust. When they reached the prince's house, the prince's father came to greet the princess, but seeing the ugly girl, he was furious and said, "Where did you bring this witch from?" The prince explained, "Father, please listen to me first, then say whatever you want." The father replied angrily, "You've always been foolish. How could you think of marrying her? I will never allow this marriage." The prince said, "It's true that I traveled far for this very princess. She is the one I saw in my dreams." The father scolded him, "How can you call this ugly woman a princess?" But when the prince told his father what had happened, and how the sorceress had cursed the princess, The father took pity on her. He brought her into the palace, assigned slaves to serve her, and ordered preparations for the wedding. Soon, the wedding preparations were complete. On the wedding day, the city's rich and important people arrived in magnificent clothes, enjoying the feast. But when they looked at the bride, they exchanged surprised glances. The cook was busy serving the guests when a beautiful bird suddenly flew in through the kitchen window and spoke. One weeps, one laughs, one dies, and one lives. One works for the sake of food, another rests and enjoys. You finish your work, get some sleep and rest. The cook laughed and said, "Oh, Chundol, you work during the day and at night as well. How can a laborer find rest? If you work, you get money. If you rest, you starve. If you don't work, where will the money come from? Then, where's the sleep? Where's the rest?" Chundol replied, "When you work all day, do you fear the master? There is one master of all, and he is God. Why should you fear his servant?" With Chundol's words, the cook became sleepy, and he began dozing off while sitting on his stool. Meanwhile, when the chicken kebabs were delayed, the wealthy man ordered the cook to be brought to him. When the servant came to call the cook and saw him sleeping, he went back and told the master that the cook was comfortably asleep on the stool. The wealthy man, angered, grabbed a whip and went to the kitchen. The chicken, which had been placed on the skewer by the cook, had burned and turned into coal. He was about to strike the cook with the whip in anger, when suddenly Chundol entered through the window and began circling above the wealthy man's head. Every time the wealthy man lifted his whip to strike the cook, Chundol spread his wings and passed over his eyes, flying back to perch on the window. The wealthy man tried many times to catch him, but failed. Soon, the prince also entered the kitchen. Seeing his father trying to catch Chundol, the wealthy man told his son to quickly close the window. The prince closed the window, and together, father and son caught Chundol. The wealthy man was about to throw him to the ground when he noticed a glowing needle in Chundol's head. He exclaimed in surprise, "What is this needle in Chundol's head?" When the wealthy man pulled the needle out, instead of Chundol, the real Narang princess appeared before them. Both father and son were overjoyed to find the true princess. The princess then narrated in detail how the black and ugly girl had come to the pond to fetch water, seen her reflection, and mistaken it for her own. The girl had then tricked her into sitting close, and while doing so, had pierced a needle into her head, turning her into Chundol. Hearing this, the wealthy man became extremely angry and ordered his servants to burn the wicked girl alive. But Narang princess requested mercy on her behalf, saying, "Today is a day of happiness. She too is a creation of God, and whatever she did, her punishment will be decided by God. You may forgive her." Thus, at the princess's request, the wealthy man forgave the girl. The wedding between the prince and Narang princess was celebrated with great pomp and joy.